Okay, we'll start with this. Demetrius Andrade had this to say. He says, I looked forward to fighting Golovkin at one point, but not anymore. Canelo Alvarez, Billy Joe Saunders, Jermall Charlo. Those were the three names Demetrius Andrade mentioned when he was asked to give his hit list during the most recent episode of the Matchroom Boxing's podcast. The undefeated Southpaw has called out Golovkin countless times over the past few years, but Andrade explained to host Chris Lloyd why his opinion on facing Golovkin has changed. I would say Triple G, but you know, Triple G did his thing. He had his time. Yeah, he's a great name. Did I fight him in his prime? No. Can I beat him in his prime? Yeah. Will the people ever see it? No. Did Canelo fight him in his prime? No. Is Canelo fighting him again? Maybe for a third time? But it's just like, you know, I'm just saying Triple G did his thing. He showed and gave boxing all he has. And is that something I'm looking forward to doing? I was at one point, but now it's not really worth excitement. If it was maybe like a year or two earlier. You can't get mad at these comments from Demetrius Andrade. All things considered, you really can't. It is true that Golovkin's removed from his prime. He's circling the drain. He is approaching the end. He's in his late 30s. We know that he's in the final phase of his career. I mean, what do you guys out there think? You guys out there, you think that Golovkin is going to be able to compete at the elite level, the championship level, for how many more years? How many? But Demetrius Andrade, who's still young, still undefeated, in his prime, the very prospect of a Golovkin fight, it doesn't mean now what it would have meant then. That's just the truth of it. More so, even now, even here today, it's unlikely that Golovkin would choose to fight Demetrius Andrade.
It is.
So if you're Demetrius Andrade, you're telling yourself, Golovkin, you know, he did his thing, but for me, there's nothing to get excited about. I didn't fight him then, and in all likelihood, I won't get to fight him now. I myself, as a boxing fan, am not expecting to see that fight anytime in the near future, if at all, in spite of those two fighters being on the same side of the street, fighting on the same platform. I'm not expecting it because at this stage, it's pretty obvious what Gennady Golovkin wants.
Yeah.
He's got to navigate very carefully now that he's in his late 30s. He doesn't take a punch as well as he used to. His age is a factor. He's still in an experimental phase with a new trainer, attempting to iron things out, gain some kind of fluidity in their relationship and their overall implementation. These are not the ideal conditions to take on a statuesque southpaw
who's in his prime,
the likes of a Demetrius Andrade. Look, both Gennady Golovkin and Jonathan Banks, Golovkin's trainer, these guys literally just put the Canelo Alvarez rubber match on the back burner. They literally did this. So if that is not appealing to you, at least right now, why would Demetrius Andrade be appealing to you? You're not going to make for Andrade what you would have made for Canelo, and you literally just passed on Canelo. You put all of those rubber match talks, those conversations, on hold. Thus, Demetrius Andrade is an even less likely guy to get a Golovkin fight. A lot is made by the boxing fans in reference to Demetrius Andrade's resume, that even though he's a two-division champion, it is a bit on the thin side. And I'm not disagreeing with those people. I'm not trying to convince you that, his resume is something to write home about. But what I am asking you to do is expand your horizons. Yes, there are a lot of names that aren't on his resume. But what names would you like to see there? And are those names, those individuals, those top shelf fighters, are they willing to fight him? Because if they're not, then it's hardly his fault that his resume is thin. We often hear about how years ago, Demetrius Andrade pulled out of a fight with one of the Charlos, and the reason was the money. He didn't like the money. This was some time ago. But for those out there who like to cite this as a part of the reason that Demetrius Andrade's resume is so thin, if that means anything to you, does it mean anything to you that they just offered Jermall Charlo $7 million to have a unification match, and Jermall
passed on it?
Rather go to a different weight class, rather move to a different division?
What you got to say about that?
Because it works both ways. Can't keep telling me about some fucking fight that didn't happen years ago with one of the Charlo brothers, when here today, one of the Charlo brothers rejected a fight with Demetrius Andrade for more money, far more money, than that fight was yesterday, all those years ago. As a boxing fan, perhaps you want to apply pressure on Demetrius Andrade to fight what top-shelf fighters are out there, and I understand that. That's what you want to see as a consumer. I get it. But the pressure has to be applied evenly. There can't just be pressure on him to make those fights because it takes two to tango. You got to apply pressure to what other guys are out there too. Gennady Golovkin is out there, and he's willfully choosing to fight a Kamil Zerimata when he could easily petition the IBF to have a unification match. We all know that he won't.
But he could.
But that's the point. He could very well petition the IBF for an exemption to the mandatory to unify with Demetrius Andrade.
He could.
Once again, we know that he won't. But why is that okay with you? Why is that okay with you whilst you at the same time criticize Demetrius Andrade for who he's not fighting? He can only fight who's willing, and if a guy like Golovkin is unwilling, if a guy like Jermall Charlo is unwilling, if Canelo can't give Demetrius the time of day, what's the guy supposed to do? Look, we've been through this several times. We've talked about what happened with the Saunders fight, ahead of it, and after it. That even after the fight got scrapped, the WBO actually afforded Billy the opportunity to fight Demetrius Andrade, and Billy's the one who walked away. Billy chose to go up to the super middleweight division, fight Shafat Isufi.
Yeah.
That if you're calling it down the middle, you can't put all the pressure on Andrade to fight the who's who guys that are out there, because the who's who guys have got to want to fight him.
Do they?
And if they don't, how's that his fault? So of course he's not excited about the prospect of a Gennady Golovkin fight. One, because Golovkin, he's not what he used to be, and two, he's not likely to get that fight anyway. Just in keeping with the news involving any one of the Charlo brothers, Jason Rosario, unified junior middleweight champion, Jason Rosario had this to say. He said, "Only thing on my mind is Jermell Charlo, proving I'm the best at 154 pounds. I will do what my promoter Samson says," Rosario told Premier Boxing Champions Ray Flores during a recent Instagram live interview. "I know that he is having a few conversations in regards to my career. He's going to let me know what is going to be happening. He's going to inform me about what the next steps are. But I'm familiar with Jermell Charlo. Look, Jermell wants my titles, and I want his title, and I want to be able to unify the 154-pound division. My objective, if I had my choice who to fight next, it's Jermell Charlo," Rosario said. "He's the best in the division. I want to go ahead and prove that I'm truly the best at 154. Right now, the only thing on my mind is Jermell Charlo, and that is a major motivating factor for me, knowing that that fight is potentially in front of me." In reference to his victory over the then-unified champion Julian Williams, Rosario said, "It didn't surprise me that he came forward and he was trying to be aggressive. I know that Julian Williams was very confident heading into that fight against me. But no, it did not surprise me whatsoever that Julian Williams was aggressive in walking forward towards me. But I was prepared for it." Might have you know that Julian Williams was actually a 30-1 favorite to win that fight against Jason.
El Jason.
And it makes it that much more monumental for Jason to beat those odds in Julian Williams' backyard, I might add, the way that he did. It's in no way, shape, or form my intention to diminish Jason's victory, upset victory over Julian with what I'm about to say. But there are things that need to be addressed. That Samson Lukowicz made it clear that he wants Rosario versus Charlo to be billed as a pay-per-view, and while Jason might want to have that Charlo unification match sooner than later, Samson, he doesn't share his enthusiasm. He's putting it off, putting it on the back burner, allowing it to have time to grow. But why must it grow?
Why?
If you're supremely confident in yourself, then you're going to want the fight sooner than later. And if your handlers are supremely confident in you and your abilities, they're going to want it sooner than later. That's the opposite of what Samson Lukowicz is doing.
He's stalling.
You say you want the fight to be a pay-per-view. You say you want to build it, but how long would it take to build this into a pay-per-view worthy matchup? How long would it take to build Rosario versus Charlo into a pay-per-view worthy event?
A year?
And what denotes whether or not something is pay-per-view worthy in the first place? There has to be a strong enough demand on the ground from the fans, a grassroots movement, in order for something to truly be pay-per-view worthy. You know, you can put any old fucking fight on pay-per-view if you want to, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get the reaction that you're looking for. That doesn't mean that it will be pay-per-view worthy just because you say it is. How long would it take to build this into a pay-per-view worthy matchup? And how long can Jason Rosario stay a champion, stay a unified champion in a division where world titles are changing hands rather frequently?
They are.
You know, they wanted to build Jarrett Hurd versus Jermell Charlo. They wanted to build that fight into something, and that fight never materialized. It was kaput after Jarrett lost his world titles to Julian, who then lost his world titles to Jason. It's kind kind of hard to build something in this weight class where it's anybody's fight on any given night. It's actually kind of counterintuitive to shelf the fight in order to build it when you don't know that you're going to have the opportunity to build it.
You don't.
If you really want to turn your guy into some kind of pay-per-view star, he's got to pay his dues, he's got to make his bones, and one way that he can do that is by unifying titles with Charlo sooner than later. Because if you wait later to do it, you might not get the chance. Your guy might get beat, or that guy might get beat.
And then what?
All that time spent building this thing could be squandered in the blink of an eye. Could happen that way. I mean, I think it's a great fight. It's a fight between world champions. It's a unification match. It's the best kind of match that this division has to offer, but it being pay-per-view worthy really isn't an exact science.
It's not.
It's not a strong enough demand on the ground to where you could or should charge the boxing community $80 to see this fucking thing. I'm sorry. I'm not against these guys trying to make, the most money that they can. I mean, I'm really not. But we've got to be realistic here. There is not a strong enough push for these two guys to fight each other that you should charge people $80 to see it. And even a year from now, I can't tell you with any certainty that people are all that interested in these two fighters.
Pay-per-view.
So you waiting to put the fight on might actually work against the both of them. They need to prove that they're the best now so that they can continue to gain momentum and eventually become pay-per-view attractions. If that's the end game, if that's what you're trying to do, you gotta pay your bones now, not later. You don't know that you'll get the chance to build this as a pay-per-view later.
You don't.
So, Jason, he believes in himself and he wants to fight sooner than later. Samson doesn't. And
I don't know what's gonna happen.
But what I can tell you is, it's a good fight. It's a great fight. Best kind of fight. Champion versus champion. But that in and of itself doesn't make it pay-per-view worthy, as only hardcore boxing fans who follow the sport closely know who these two guys are. And finally, Caleb Plant had this to say. He says, Canelo is a fight I would love to have. Now, a portion of the article highlights how, at least based on reports, Caleb was already offered this fight. Article reads, at the time, Alvarez was still in negotiations for a May 2nd fight that would eventually go to another unbeaten 168-pound titleist in England's Billy Joe Saunders. Rumors swirled of the opportunity being presented to Plant, who was dismissive and skeptical of the intentions of the other side. He was quoted as saying, that's a fight that I would love to have now. After fighting in February 15th, I wasn't fighting anybody on May 2nd. It doesn't matter now because nobody fought on May 2nd due to the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Even before that, they weren't going to fight me anyways. They were going to fight Billy Joe Saunders. They didn't even make an offer to me and my team. It was a secondary person who reached out and, we said we're not doing that. They didn't offer money. We didn't price ourselves out. It was 9 weeks after I just fought. That's just not realistic, notes Plant, who served as an unbeaten titleist since January. I think a lot of people were confused, saying I needed rest from the fight when I didn't take punishment. But if you know boxing, you know it's not about resting from the fight. It's about resting from the camp. Running, sprinting, doing miles, being abstinent, making weight, all the things you've excluded from your life for 8 weeks, you want back in your life. I'm no up-and-comer or prospect or contender. I've solidified myself as one of the very, very top in my weight class. I don't have to just jump on any unreasonable offer that's thrown to me. No, you don't. Of course you don't. But if you don't, remember, it's your loss. Of course, this is Canelo Alvarez we're talking about. This ain't Billy Joe Saunders. This ain't Callum Smith. This ain't David Benavidez. This is fucking Canelo Alvarez.
Right?
And whether it was a primary person that reached out to you or a secondary person, as you say, either way, it's an opportunity for you. You hear what Caleb Plant is saying? He fought in February, and the fight was set to go down in May. We all know that no fights ended up happening in May, but that's besides the point, because at this time, you had to make a decision, and you made it. You had just defended your title in February, and they were talking about you potentially fighting Canelo in May, and for you, that wasn't enough time. We're talking about roughly 2.5 months. That's what we're talking about. And for Caleb, that wasn't enough time. He wanted to get certain things back into his life. It's his decision. It's his choice, just like it was his opportunity. But that's basically saying it didn't mean that much to you. That's what that communicates. That's what that means. That someone did reach out to you. You're admitting that. Primary, secondary, whatever. You're still admitting that someone reached out to you, and finance didn't even get the chance to come into it because what you didn't like was the time frame. So how could finance even come into it when you're basically saying, no, that's too short notice for me?
Huh?
You know when Canelo Alvarez has a fight. We all do, you know?
You know.
We know what time of year Canelo Alvarez likes to make an appearance in the ring. You know it just as much as I know it, just as much as everybody knows it. And if you want the opportunity to fight this fighter,
You gotta play ball.
you gotta take chances, you gotta make concessions, you got to make sacrifices. You were asked to make a sacrifice, and it's a sacrifice because you don't want to fight within that allotted time frame. Okay.
Okay.
How do you know that you're gonna get this opportunity again?
Huh?
If you pass on this, what assurance do you have that you'll still be on Canelo Alvarez's radar in the future?
Huh?
Look, I'm sorry. I think that Caleb Plant, he's a good kid. He's a good fighter. Good champion, all right? Guy's a pleasure to watch. But at the end of the day, I do happen to think he shot himself in the foot, and it's because you didn't want that fight bad enough. So moving forward, you'd be lucky if Canelo even sneezes anywhere in the vicinity of you, anywhere in the vicinity of your direction. Because he doesn't need you, but you need him.
You do.
You're not going to get David Benavidez in the ring. We've established that already. For those interested in that video, I'll leave the link in the description box. So you say, I don't want to bend over for Canelo. And you know what? You don't have to. You really don't.
Fuck him.
You don't have to concede to everything he wants. You don't have to bow to him. It's just that you're the one that's still talking about it. It's not Canelo sitting around talking about Caleb. It's Caleb sitting around talking about Canelo. And if you insist on talking about Canelo and how now is a more opportune time for you to have that fight, guess what? That's really not your decision to make. These kind of opportunities, especially in this fucking sport, they're far and few, and you just passed on one. And yes, it would have required you to make sacrifices, but these opportunities often do. Yeah, Floyd, he had to make concessions to Oscar. Canelo had to make concessions to Floyd.
That's how these things work.
You were asked to potentially have a fight sooner than you would have liked, but it would have been a fight with the cash cow, the face of boxing in this region of the world. And what do? You were more concerned with how that affects your schedule. All right then.
Oh.
Don't tell me nothing about you doubting what their intentions really were, that, I wasn't going to get the fight anyway. They were going to fight Billy. Hey, somebody reached out to you. That's what we know, and we know that because you're the one that told us. So you can't double back on it now. I really don't know what Caleb's going to do in the near future once boxing resumes. Who's he going to fight? Who's he going to fight of any note? Who's he going to fight to get him in a pole position to become some kind of a big marquee attraction? I don't know. It won't be David Benavidez. Apparently it won't be Canelo either. So you ask me, if he potentially shot himself in the foot by handling the situation the way that he did, I dare say yes. He's a good kid, you know? But I think it was mismanaged. I think it didn't mean enough to him. And it just is what it is.